side of history, it means you really are on the right side of history. Having said that, though, the incentives are a real issue, and I think the biggest incentive, and I'll go to you, Czar, what about birthright citizenship? I mean, you just get across the border, you get here, and then you're born here, you're a citizen. Is that something that needs to change?
Well, I'll say this is an enticement. It's a magnet for more illegal immigration. For example, under President Obama, a lot of families came across, a lot of single females came across, and Jay Johnson was the secretary at the time, and I respect Jay Johnson. Didn't agree with him all the time, but his door was always open. He heard me out, right? So despite all the hate on Trump, President Obama approved a family operation where these family groups who've been ordered removed because they lost their case. And 90% of people who claim asylum at the border will end up with order removal because they simply don't qualify for asylum. They're coming here for a better life, I get that. But they're not escaping fear and persecution from their home government because of the race, religion, and political affiliation. So make a fraudulent asylum claim. So we had hundreds of family units that were ordered removed by the judge. The Obama administration approved us to go look for these people and deport them. We went looking for them. 44% of these family units, the mother's already had a U.S. citizen child or was pregnant with a U.S. citizen child. Despite all the hate that's out there and people attacking this, that is a driver for illegal immigration because they say illegal aliens don't take social benefits. Well, I argue with that. I've been doing this a long time. They do. But having a U.S. citizen increases the use of social services, and it's a driver of illegal immigration. Birthright citizenship. Russia and China, the two biggest countries, where they come here on a visa, visitor visa, tourist visa, and they're pregnant. And they have a U.S. citizen child while they're here. They're not here for be a tourist or a visitor. They're here to have a child and become a U.S. citizen. So I think the Supreme Court finally needs to answer that question. You know, I'm not a lawyer, but I can read. I don't think it's clear that illegal alien that has a child in this country is automatically a U.S. citizen. When they keep going back to the Wong case. The Wong was actually here under immigration control. They were here legally. They weren't citizens, but they're here legally. They were here under the control of the government. So we'll see what the Supreme Court says. I hope the Supreme Court will decide the right way. But I have the same fear as you have. But it's a driver of illegal immigration. And here's what I need people to understand. I know I've got some haters out there, and I love that. Because I'm not running a popularity contest. But when people are saying this is just innocent illegal immigration, there is no such thing. Because if you wore my shoes for 34 years, there's a whole ugly underbelly of illegal immigration. 31% of women that make their journey get sexually assaulted. Fact. While I'm talking to you right now, women are being sexually assaulted as part of their fee to cross the border. Luckily, because of President Trump and border down 96%, less of that's happening. But illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. I've done it for a long time. And it's a right way and wrong way to enter the greatest country on earth. We got millions of people standing in line, taking their tests, doing their background investigation, paying the fees. They're sitting in the back seat while millions of people in the Biden administration cheated the system. They can claim they're asylum seekers all they want. Okay, they're seeking asylum. But here's what you need to understand. Nearly 90% of everybody that claims asylum at our southern border end up with an order removal, which is why we need to do a massive deportation operation. Everybody says, well, what a racist thing to say. No. When you have a massive illegal alien crisis on our southern border by the millions, and we know 90% don't qualify for asylum, people on the left can say they have a right to claim asylum. They have a right to see a judge. They have a right to due process. And we made that happen. But due process doesn't mean squat if the final decision of the courts isn't carried out and executed. That's what due process is. So since 90% of millions of people came across the border to be order removed, those orders have to be executed. If they're not executed, then what the hell are we doing? Just shut down immigration court doesn't mean anything anymore. Take the Border Patrol off the border. We need to send a message to the whole world. There's a right way and wrong way to come to this country. There's a legal way to do it. If you want to be part of the greatest nation on earth, breaking our law shouldn't be the first thing you do.
I mean, I think the biggest enticement to come is employment, and then in places like California, benefits, like taxpayer benefits. but I think birthright citizenship is also an enticement. And that was not what the 14th Amendment was ever intended to do with respect to illegally crossing the border and then giving birth here in the United States. The purpose of the 14th Amendment was to overturn the Dred Scott case, which said that basically blacks could not be U.S. citizens. Dred Scott was a freed slave. He sued. The Supreme Court said he can't be considered a citizen. Lincoln rightfully attacked that ruling. Lincoln was not even going to, he said that you shouldn't comply with the ruling. You know, you hear some of these people talk, oh, they're not following court orders. Read what Lincoln said about Dred Scott. Lincoln did not submit to Dred Scott. And so when you had time for the 14th Amendment, that was written in there to nullify the Dred Scott decision. And that was specifically meant to deal with the issue of African Americans, particularly after the abolition of slavery. Now, and Tom makes a good point, because in law school we're even taught, oh, the Supreme Court's already decided anyone born here is a citizen. And I used to think that was the law until I started really looking at it. But this Wong Kim case from the 1880s or 90s, you had two Chinese nationals who legally immigrated to the United States, and then they had and then they said under those circumstances that was birthright. But that's a lot different than people coming in contrary to what the law is, where the American people have never, through their elected representatives, provided that pathway to come just across the border. So it's definitely a live issue. I think the Supreme Court will tackle it. Look, I don't know that I would be heavily optimistic that they'll rule the right way. I think it's possible, but I think it's very much a jump ball. We know how three of them will rule the opposite. They will say, you know, as long as you get across that border illegally, a minute later give birth, or say that's what the Constitution somehow is supposed to be. We know that's not what is there, and it's not honestly what the text says. But it is going to be litigated. I think the president was right to do the executive order. He knew that this was going to end up in the courts, and that's fine. I mean, this is the type of an issue where a Supreme Court would end up having the ability to pass judgment on. But let's just be clear: how this has developed over the last many decades, no one at the time the 14th Amendment was ratified would have said that was appropriate. And if you had told them that's what was going to happen, the 14th Amendment as written would not have even been ratified.
Yeah, I agree. I think this idea that, and I think President Trump and his team was very smart. You know, the executive order is very specific about birthright citizenship, and they knew it was going to get into the courts, so I certainly agree with that. But they started focusing on those folks that come to the United States illegally, and whether they have or their children have a right to citizenship here, and I think that is something that certainly needs to be decided. But Tom brought it up, and the governor's brought it up, this idea that you have a right to asylum, or you have a right to a student visa, right, the Columbia student who is being deported, or that you have a right to a green card. I think the left has misconstrued that for so long. You don't have a right to any of that. That is a benefit. That is a discretionary benefit that the United States government provides you. And embedded in that are restrictions and things that you need to do to adhere to that. And so this idea that you can't deport students, or this idea that you can't deny green cards or even remove people with green cards, of course you can. That's a discretionary benefit in immigration law that the United States government provides. And when you don't adhere to certain principles and certain requirements, well, guess what? You don't have a right to that. That can be withdrawn and you can be removed. So a lot of this that we've talked about here is just getting the American people to think about what they've been sort of told for so long. People have a right to certain things. Actually, if you look at the law, which Tom and others do quite often, that's actually not the case. And I think what President Trump and the team is doing this time around, we did it what I call Trump 1.0. We did it there as well, is actually looking at the law and actually adhering to the law and administrating an immigration system how it was supposed to be designed, not how it's been conceived over many decades.